So 2021 came and went like that, and it just so happens that this is the year that I've read the most books like ever. So let me share with you 7 books that made me love reading this year. If you're trying to read more in 2022, I definitely recommend checking some of these out. We've got a really good mix here of fiction and non-fiction. Anyways, all of the links are in the description below. Let's jump into it. The first book on this list is one that I read like all the way back in the beginning of the year, and I think it's been the one that's had by far the most noticeable impact on my life, and that is Show Your Work by Austin Kleon. This book is perfect for like people who really dislike this idea of self-promotion, because it kind of walks you through the process of what it would look like to authentically share what you're working on with other people without at the same time becoming what Austin in his book likes to call human spam. I think we've all seen human spam at some point. It's like this kind of person that sort of pushes content on you without really providing value to you or anyone except for themselves. Personally, I've always been very interested in teaching and sort of sharing what I'm learning along the way, but at the same time, I've always been sort of reserved and like super quiet, just because I've never wanted to be that person that just kind of forces things onto other people. So when I read this book, which is basically all about this idea that you can sort of document your progress along the way, and by doing so, you're not being pushy onto other people, and at the same time, you're like providing a way for people to look at things that might be able to help them that you've learned. That sort of blew my mind, and it sort of clicked for me that it's okay to, for example, have a YouTube channel or have a blog as a way to talk about the things that you're learning along the way, because you're not sort of being that pushy individual. And yeah, I've been doing YouTube and a blog for a year now because of this book, and I definitely think it's been a net positive in my life. So bottom line, if you're someone who's always been kind of hesitant about sharing what you're working on online, or you've had an inkling that you might want to have a YouTube channel or even a blog, this is definitely a game changer book for you. The second nonfiction book on this list is something that I wish I had read like years ago, just because of how much it's affected my mentality when it comes to careers and money in general, and that is The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. I've thought about this a lot, and I'm pretty sure that if I hadn't read this book, I would have probably burnt out at some point or been very unhappy with my life in the future, just because of how like significant of a shift my mental models have gone through after reading that book. On the surface, it does appear to be like a very businessy book. I mean, literally on the title page, it says, "Escape 9 to 5, live anywhere, and join the new rich." And yes, it's like all about that stuff. But at the same time, on a deeper level, this book is more about reflecting on sort of where your life is going, what your goals really are, and where you're headed in terms of a career. The book really gets you to think about like the default life paths a lot of people just kind of tend to follow through passively, and instead tries to get you to think of alternative options that have like always been available to you, but that you never really knew they existed, or you never realized they were there. And the best part about this book is that it's not really based on theory. Every single concept or key takeaway involved is entirely based on Tim's own experience as he was essentially running his company and living a very unorthodox lifestyle. And what really surprised me about this is that most of the things that involve living like the 4-hour workweek lifestyle, all you really need is like an internet connection. It's really surprising how much you can do just by having an internet connection. And you know what? I'm actually gonna read this again in 2022, so I hope you read it as well. So we've covered sharing work online, and we've covered finances and lifestyle design. Now, the next nonfiction book and the last nonfiction book on this list is one based on relationships. Just came out this year, and it is called How to Not Die Alone by Logan Ury. I don't think anyone wants to die alone. At least I don't want to die alone. And well, part of me is kind of like, oh, cringe. Why would you read a book on relationships? It's not like anyone really teaches this stuff. I think dating falls into that like weird category of things that we're not like formally taught and just kind of expected to naturally know like what's right and what's wrong. And so I think there's really 2 options here. Either one, you date a bunch of people and kind of learn about what's right and what's wrong from just a huge amount of experience, or 2, just fast forward your progress by reading one single book in an afternoon. I'll take the afternoon. I'm very much in the group of people that would just rather speed things up by learning from an expert on the field and then knowing kind of like what to look out for when I'm actually dating individuals, because after all, picking your partner is like one of the most important decisions of your life. So basically, if you've never actively thought about dating and why some of your relationships have been really good and why some of them have been really bad, I strongly recommend this book. As I was reading this book, I was actually laughing to myself because of just how accurately it described some of the dating tendencies that I have that I never really noticed until they were just shoved in my face by reading. And so because of that, I'm a lot more self-aware on what like I have to pay attention to and watch myself for in the future. Even if you're in a committed relationship, I would strongly recommend picking this up, because it really Just knowing your relationship tendencies can be really helpful, and also there's like a whole chapter on marriage and when to take the relationship to the next level. That was it for non-fiction, so let's move on to the fiction books that I would rate 6 out of 5 if I could. Okay, to start things off, I really want to say that I'm not a fan of series. I would much rather have an individual novel, finish it, and then move on to the next novel, because then it's like I'm moving from story to story rather than I'm feeling like stuck in one universe. So of course my first recommendation for a fiction book is an 11-book series that it's basically taking me the entire year to finish, and that is Arifureta, From Commonplace to World's Strongest by Ryo Shirakome. This is by far the best underdog story that I've ever read, and it's also an anime that nobody should watch because it's not very great, at least in my opinion. But regardless, it's basically a story about a high schooler that is bullied a lot, and then his entire class gets teleported into another world to be like the heroes of that world. Everyone gets cool powers except him, so this makes him get bullied even more, and eventually he's left for dead. So that's how it starts, and essentially throughout the 11 books, we actually see Hajime, the main character, grow and struggle on to become like ridiculously overpowered, and along the way he finds people who actually care about him. All of this sounds kind of like a cliche power trip story, but what really kept me reading throughout like the 11 volumes, again, I don't like series, is the deeper implications and themes in the books that have a lot to do with the comparison between sheer grit and then complacency due to natural talent. A lot of the story really resonates with this general worldview that I have, that it doesn't really matter if you're quite bad at something. Through sheer grit and determination, just like trying harder again and again, it's very much possible for you to become at least good at that thing. And so that's why I enjoyed this story a lot. It really resonates with me personally, and it's not done. There's another chapter coming out, hopefully soon. The next fiction book is a romance, actually, and it literally was made into a movie that comes out this week. It's called The Hating Game. At its core root, I mean, it's just a simple story about two people who think they hate each other, but they don't. I like this story a lot, just because there's not a lot of like codependency between the main characters. Each one of them is incredibly successful, independent, and has their own priorities and goals. So it's not like other romances where you have one character that like sweeps the other character off their feet. It's more of an equal playing field where they kind of make up for the other's weaknesses and spend the entire story trying to one-up each other, because after all, the trick is to find someone who's strong enough to take it, that one person who can give it back as good as they get. Hopefully the movie's good, very much looking forward to it. Next up is a book where you can sell your life for money. Isn't that just a job? So anyways, in this book, our main character trades away 3 months of his life for just a little bit of money, and of course, I'm talking about the light novel 3 Days of Happiness by Sugaru Miaki. I actually made a video about this book somewhere linked up above, and the story goes that I bought this right before an 8-hour flight on my Kindle, and I could not look away. I stayed up the entire 8 hours reading the book, and I was jet lagged for like a week, and it was totally worth it. It touches on a lot of very deep topics like regrets, false hopes, love, and it made me really question how I was spending my time, because outside of the very interesting concept of just being able to literally sell away like the time that you're alive for money, morality is like the main huge underlying theme of this book. As a bonus though, outside of like the very deep topics that it touches, this is actually very secretly a love story. And so because it made me cry like a little baby by the end of the book, I went out and bought the hardcover version just so I can have it on my very limited bookshelf as a permanent reminder of like the story and experience that I had while reading this. Finally, we have the one science fiction book on this list, which took me quite a bit of time to finish. It's pretty fat. To Sleep in a Sea of Stars is Christopher Paolini's newest book. You might know him from writing the very popular and much loved by me Inheritance cycle that started with the book Eragon. This book is a bit different though. This is entirely science fiction, unlike Eragon, which was essentially fantasy. In this book, humanity is slowly expanding outwards onto the universe until they discover something that has the potential to wipe everyone out. As I was reading this, I was also watching the series The Expanse over on Prime Video, and that combination of reading this and watching The Expanse was like perfection. Both this book and that series use reasonable explanations of what politics may look like, what issues we may come across, and what technologies might be developed for mankind to be able to sort of spread out outside of Earth and onto other planets and the solar system. If you're a fan of semi-realistic space exploration and watching a SpaceX launch makes you really excited, then I would strongly recommend checking this out because it has some very interesting perspectives of what the future may look like. Finally, if you've got a recommendation for me, do make sure to comment below. I've got like a 30-something hour journey to Australia coming up in a few weeks, and I'm definitely looking to get an early start on my 2020 reading challenge. Besides that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you wouldn't mind hitting that like and subscribe button, I would very much appreciate it. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.